Hi folks and welcome to our Sci-Fi.
If you've recently had the feeling you're actually in a sci-fi film yourself, don't despair. You're not alone. In fact, what better time to talk about how sci-fi has repeatedly warned us of what we're going through right now with an entire planet completely off limits? While we wait patiently for a vaccine, here's a brief review of sci-fi stories about viruses and pandemics. Let's start with 12 Monkeys, a 1995 film with Bruce Willis and the most wired Brad Pitts you'll ever see. A film which is really spot on when it comes to current times. There's even been a TV series by the same name, but apparently little else in common with this classic, which is not so surprising as I'm really put off by these TV remakes of oldies from the 80s and 90s, which are just about the worst form of entertainment you could ever imagine. But let's get back to the film. In a not too distant future, somewhere around 2035, human civilization has been swept away by a viral pandemic which has bumped off 90% of the world's population, with just a small clutch of survivors living holed up underground because, well, actually why they're underground isn't explained, which is strange when you think that viruses don't remain in the air or on surfaces for that long. The protagonist is a jailbird who is press-ganged into collecting biological samples that help scientists in their war against the virus. So it is plausible that this virus may be hiding in what's called a viral reservoir. In other words, an infected animal host that generally remains a healthy carrier. Hence the hordes of animals in the film. There's even a bear, which is weird when you think that bears are supposed to hibernate in the winter. But in any case, the story about the viral reservoir doesn't make much sense, as we're dealing with a virus that has escaped from a laboratory, and thus a new organism, which could hardly have developed a symbiosis with animal hosts over such a short time span. Much more convincing would have been a case of spillover, with the virus already present in nature jumping from one animal species to another. But enough nitpicking and hair-splitting, because, slip-ups aside, the film is a real jewel when it comes to post-apocalyptic culture. Besides pandemics, the film is all about journeys through time, but not in a Back to the Future style where messing around with timelines and correcting mistakes is always possible. Here matters are far worse. The past has already happened and cannot be changed, so regardless of how so few survivors have managed to make such a hefty technological advances, including traveling back in time despite being holed up underground with no resources, less people and a measly scientific network compared with the 5 billion people of yesteryear, there's no way of preventing the pandemic in the first place. Not exactly a piece of cake. This really intransigent and relentless approach leads us to reflect on issues which should really be a wake-up call given what we're going through now. The sense of a foreboding task that we get throughout the film may be interpreted as an allegory of the circumstances we could very well be facing in the near future. You've all seen what has happened with this coronavirus. We really screwed things up at the start of the contagion, and then things got out of hand. Once the virus had spread quite a bit, it was impossible to contain it. So we had to put the whole country on hold, which is what happened in many other countries as well, with unspeakable consequences for the future. But folks, scientists and other celebrities has been warning us year after year about the dangers of global pandemics. Get on to YouTube and you'll find heaps of videos from years ago that are wake-up calls on these risks. One of them is Bill Gates' famous TED Talk, a link to which you'll find below. Now that Pandora's box has been well and truly opened, there's no turning back. The damage has been done, and there's no way in which we can patch things up or make them what they were before. Today we're quarantined and have had to give up all our social life for the time being, and goodness knows what we'll have to give up tomorrow. Let's hope that this setback can teach us something. For instance, have you thought about what else might happen, in particular as regards the other real danger that scientists for ages now have been warning us about? Global warming, which cannot be remedied once we've reached the point of no return. As if this weren't bad enough, I'm sorry to have to tell you, it's very likely that we're already well beyond the point of no return. In 20 years from now, our lives will no longer be what they are now, and we won't be able to do anything about it, which is just what happened in the film, where Cole, the character that Bruce Willis plays, is sent back in time not to stop the apocalypse, but to gather information about it and, if possible, to get a sample of the original virus so that mankind can live a little less badly. Which is something we can do if we set about it now. We can perhaps mitigate the catastrophe that will hit us in the future. And that, believe it or not, is the scenario currently accepted by today's scientific community. Back to the film. Cole is a prisoner in the future and is chosen as a guinea pig for these dangerous missions in exchange for a possible pardon if he succeeds. To begin with, he's sent back to 1990, which is the wrong time, as it's 6 years before the pandemic, which strikes in 1996. Obviously, Cole is sent to a psychiatric hospital, as he is not subtle enough to avoid beating up the policeman who found him half naked in the streets, shouting, "I come from the future! You're all condemned!" Although Cole is the perfect incarnation of the violent nutcase stereotype, one of the hospital's female psychiatrists decides that there's some good in him, so that during the entire film she helps him complete his mission. Certainly, at the beginning she's kidnapped by Cole, when the scientists finally manage to send him back to the right year. But we see that, in circumstances in which she could simply have sneaked off, she decides to stay with this raging lunatic who goes ranting on about an army of 12 monkeys. The whole charade would have been less credible if instead of Bruce Willis, the character had been portrayed by Danny DeVito or you yourself. Some cheesiness here and there aside, the acting in the film is absolutely superlative. Bruce Willis is simply a giant in what will probably remain the most dramatic and profoundest role he has ever had. Cole's personality undergoes a change during the film. To begin with, he is quite zealous about his mission, as he wants to be pardoned and lead a better life in his own time. In other words, somewhere around 2035. But then he starts becoming attached to life before the apocalypse, with its fresh air, food, people, and so on. The breaking point is when he hears Fats Domino sing Blueberry Hill on the radio. When he hears this melody, Cole cries and puts his head out of the window to feel the wind on his face. This is a very moving moment in the film, emotionally involving the viewer in a powerful way, because the joy is so overflowing and melancholic that Cole sampling these little things we take for granted allows us to understand just how much he has suffered in a life with no fresh air and no human contact. Watching the film while we are quarantined considerably increases the level of reflection that it unleashes. Can you remember when it was possible to go out, drink a beer with friends, go to the cinema? I found my thrill on Blueberry Hill. But folks, be responsible and respect the quarantine rules. Back to the film. From here on, Cole loses all interest in the pardon because he has decided that there's nothing better than living in that world, in the open, and with all the little things that he no longer takes for granted, and because, well, he's a bit in love with Dr. Catherine Riley. Indeed, when he is called back to the future after discovering that it was he himself who gave Jeffrey Goins, the son of a famous virologist, the idea about an apocalypse, Cole convinces himself he must be mad and that the future and scientists are only the result of his delirium. So strong is his desire to believe that the world of 1996 is the real thing. The scientists congratulate him because he has in fact completed his mission successfully, having discovered Goins. But Cole, instead of enjoying life as the hero of the destroyed world, manages to convince them to send him back in time once more with the excuse that he needs to gather more information while actually hiding his secret desire to desert and remain in the past. An anti-Milton solution, as it were. Cole's behavior is very human. He gives up trying to save the future in order to enjoy the present. Think about that. However, it soon becomes clear that Goins and the 12 monkeys are only a band of animal lover fruit and nutcakes, and that their plan was to free animals from the local zoo and let them wander undisturbed around the city. Nothing more, which explains the "It Was Us" graffiti and the 12 monkeys logo. We also find out, by a pure fluke, that the person who is really responsible for the viral apocalypse is a religious extremist who is also a mad virologist who worked in Goen's father's laboratory. This person somehow manages, and in an unexplained way, to steal the lethal virus, and off he goes to the airport with his briefcase full of super sealed vials and a wad of plane tickets which will take him to the world's most populated cities, Rome included. He is stopped at the security check, where the security guard examines his super-sealed, leak-proof and rather frightening containers and tries to open them, which is not that smart. The guard then asks this virus carrier to open them, which is rather strange when you recall that they're transparent and that there was thus no need to open them in the first place. However, Catherine wants cold and he decides to go flat out in a desperate bid running toward the virus carrier, his gun blazing, but is killed by the security guards before he can shoot. But in any case, the container had already been opened, so it was already too late. Added to this is the fact that Cole dies watched by himself as a child, a scene which we have seen from the very start of the film as a dream Cole constantly has and which ends the cycle in a sad but rather beautiful way. There is, however, a final positive note at the end of the film, where Dr. Fletcher, the virus carrier, gets on the plane and sits next to a woman and the two begin to talk. If you look carefully, you'll see that she is one of the scientists from the future, and given the fact that she doesn't look 40 years younger, it becomes clear that she has been sent back into the past after Cole's phone call, which he managed to make at the airport before his desperate assault. So, to recap, 12 Monkeys is a singularly somber film full of meaning. There are many types of madmen in the film. There is Goins, who really is off his rocker, but who claims, perhaps not without reason, that the people who are really mad are those who advocate modern consumer culture. And then there are his supporters, who are perhaps even crazier, as they simply follow what this madman says and does. Then there's Cole as well, who tries to persuade himself that he's mad because he hasn't agreed to his sad circumstances, which in itself is perhaps a form of madness. There's also Fletcher, your madman par excellence, beset with mystic delusions. Finally, there's everybody else, out of their mind insofar as they are incapable of seeing the end looming. The fact that the virus is man-made, and that it was a human being who decided to unleash it, lightens the feeling of impotence that arises from the unstoppable pandemic that has been heralded. In actual fact, it's quite rare to find stories where chaos strikes haphazardly. It's comforting to think that we're the only ones who can destroy our civilization. And if the virus had been natural and the pandemic had been meaningless, then that would have been far too much for the viewer to swallow. Then again, the fact that the scientists often get things wrong, both in their analysis and when they send Cole back to a particular year in the past, opens up a small crack in our certainty about whether those in charge are, if they want to, actually capable of fixing things up. Which is where we could start a very long discussion, which begins with conspiracy theories. Have you noticed that there is an absurd conspiracy theory doing the rounds which says that the pandemic is caused by 5G? Some hotheads in England have even gone so far as to burn down some 5G masts in the thirst of a Frankenstein-inspired trail of destruction. This testifies to the fact that our minds reject anything that does not make sense within our tiny autoreferential world. It is far more reassuring to believe that this is a plot, rather than accept that catastrophes can happen by chance. Then there's the desire to avoid anything that is unsettling. For example, there is something we could do to restrict the onset of zoonoses In other words, diseases that jump from animals to humans, as happened with COVID-19. We could, for example, stop putting pressure on ecosystems that are close to ours and halt the disruptive effects that our industrial activities have on them. For greater details, you should refer to what scientists have said about this matter. But please, make sure it is scientific. Don't trust what somebody churns out on YouTube, Facebook or they likes. For information about coronaviruses, only trust what you find on your country's health ministry site or on the World Health Organization's site. Right, so I've told you what I wanted to say, so let me get back to my walk, but let me remind you that when I find the vaccine, it will only be given to those subscribing to this channel. So I advise you to activate the bell, and whilst you're at it, click the thumbs up button. Then, as usual, write in the comments how happy you are to live in such an interesting age and tell me what your Blueberry Hill is. If you want, there's a formidable Facebook group that I'll link you to in the description. The next video will be about the Andromeda Strain, a film where the contagion is of an unknown nature from a military satellite that has crashed on Earth, which threatens to thwart efforts to contain it. So, stay tuned! That's all for now, see you next time!